Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. This scene happened when I was 21 years old. It's in a smaller town outside of a huge city in the Midwest. This was 1981, and I worked at a fast food, and they stayed open until 3 a.m. My then husband worked for a bowling bowl alley as a manager, and he was never off before 2 a.m. I was expecting my first child, and business was slow, so I was sent home about 1 a.m. In the town we lived in, there was a large private girls' college. Women were being warned to lock their car doors because 2 males were still on the loose that were targeting women around my age. They were sometimes following them home and attacking or forcing a woman alone late at night off the road. The men were raping and killing the women, and they had killed 3 women by this point. 2 of the women were found on deserted roads, and 1 in her apartment. There was no description of these men or what kind of vehicle they drove. I left work and I climbed into my car. I locked my doors and I started for home. The hair on the back of my head stood up on the end, and my gut feeling told me that something was very wrong. I figured out that I was being followed home. I took several turns around town trying to shake this car, but to no avail. The advice given was that if you thought you were being followed, is to drive to the police station. But we had just recently moved to this area, so I had no idea where the police station was. I was terrified. I panicked, and I couldn't think what to do. This was in the days with no cell phones, but the payphones were made in different areas where you could drive up to them, sit in the driver's seat, put your window down, and the payphones had a longer cord to enable you to stay in your car and just talk. You still had to deposit money in order to talk, even when you're calling 911. I thought briefly about trying to get to one of these phones, but I was too scared, and I didn't think that I could have a coin ready in time before these men could have the time to approach me. My parents lived about 4 streets over from where I lived, and I decided that the safest decision was to try to make it to my parents' house. I was still being followed when I got to my parents' house. There was a short block that you could go around, and I went around this block about 3 times, and every single time that I did, I honked the horn. You would have thought that laying on the horn would have discouraged these creeps from continuing, but it had no effect. If anything, they moved in closer behind me. I pulled into their driveway, and these creeps pulled right in behind me, turned their lights off, and I heard their doors open and shut. I was beyond terror at this point, and they were out of their car, one coming up on one side and one on the other. My parents' house was a split level, and you pulled up in front of a double-car garage. In order to get into the house, you had to go in through the garage door or the front door, and the front door was to the left of the driveway, about 2 car lengths away, plus a set of steps. I laid on the horn again, and they still kept coming. My dad, who is a retired military, oftentimes stayed up late at night watching TV. And thank God that he did this night. All of a sudden, he turned the porch light on and burst out the front door. He assessed the situation instantly and started yelling at these creeps to get the fuck away from my car while barreling down the steps towards them. At first, they didn't retreat very fast, but they must have thought better. My dad is very big-boned and about 6'4". He had a brother that played in college football, and he wore a size 15 shoe. He made it to the front of their car and pounded on the hood of it before they were able to burn rubber, reversing out of the driveway. While he was unable to get a license number because they didn't have a front plate, he was able to describe them and gave a make and model to the police. The police told me how fortunate I was that my dad had realized what a dire situation I was in. I still get chills thinking back to that night, and I remember it as if it were yesterday. My dad said that he thought he heard a car honk more than once and that he heard me in the driveway. He had just shut off the TV and he was heading for bed when I pulled in. But thank God, my dad acted so quickly, or I might not be writing this today. This incident has caused me to be hyper aware of my surroundings, and I never turn into my driveway without making sure that I am not followed. Always be mindful of where you are, and don't walk around with your headphones on or phone pressed to your ear. You never know when you may be an opportunistic moment for someone with ill intentions. Know where your local police station is, and if you ever get chills that something is wrong, drive into the police station and the police are more than happy to help you out. It's really better safe than sorry. The police did capture these creeps about 2 weeks later, and they didn't get a fourth victim. They were both on probation for kidnapping and rape and served their time and decided killing their victims left no witnesses. My dad is still my hero today because his quick actions prevented me from being the fourth victim. And the color, model, and make of the car that my dad described was the description of what they were driving when they were arrested. This just happened to me an hour ago as I'm driving back home from work. As I'm at an intersection not too far from my house, there was a car from the opposite side of the road turning into where I'm going, and then we almost hit each other. We both stopped on time, and it was really no biggie. But the guy in the car is noticeably yelling at me from inside his car, giving me the middle finger. Well, alright, I just let him go ahead, and I thought that that would be the end of the road rage for tonight. But oh boy, was I wrong. Immediately after I let the guy through, behind him was a car turning very fast, so I accelerated and I quickly got in front of him. Not out of ego or anything. I just thought that considering the position of my car in the turning lane, it's likely that this dumbass would hit me. But right afterwards, this guy is obviously pissed off and he starts flickering his extremely bright lights at me for a minute straight. It was annoying as hell, considering something brighter than the goddamn sun is shining at me for a minute, and you can tell that it's really hard to navigate at night like that. So I said to myself, well, two can play at this game, asshole. And I slowed down to 20 miles an hour from 50 for a minute or so. Still flicking his lights, but not as much at this point. At this point, I was close to home and I turned into my subdivision, thinking that this whole saga would end then and there. But holy shit, this guy follows me into my maze of a neighborhood, and I get near my house and he's still following me. I freaked the hell out and I was wondering, should I just park in my driveway and he will go away? Or maybe should I just go into a random neighborhood and then lose him there? So as soon as I passed my house, I decided to go right past it and into another neighborhood a couple of minutes away. And he follows me exactly to there. At this point, I left that neighborhood and I just freaking jumped on my gas pedal and I sped down the road and made a random right turn. At this point, this guy is still following me, but it's a red light for him, so thankfully he stops and after that he lost me. Honestly, this was a scary experience for me, considering that my suburb isn't too far from very dangerous hoods where gunshots can be heard often. Who knows that if I would have stopped my car at home, maybe this guy would have got a gun out and then shoot at me. It's just really creepy how this road rage asshole easily followed me to my house in an obvious attempt to scare me. Warning: allusions to suicide, death threats, harming language. Do not listen if this could upset you. Well, I've recently found this subreddit and I decided that I would share a story to you all. This happened back in 2019 to 2021 and it still sticks with me today. I will be using fake names for myself and the man that I'm talking about, Mary for me and Dennis for him. When I was 13, I met someone on Discord. He was funny, smart, and exactly my type. He was also 16. I don't know my logic with that being okay at 13, but I was stupid and naive. We became close friends, and after about 3 months of knowing him, I told him that I had feelings for him. We then ended up dating. We lived across country from each other, and we were basically just friends, but whatever. So, as we are dating, he starts basically grooming me. As a kid who was always on the internet and was exposed to kink, I was used to this behavior and I thought that it was fine. He had me send nude photos, gross messages, and pretty much worship him. I wasn't allowed to talk to people on Discord without him there and stuff like that. He told me that he would kill himself if I ever left him, or how he was always on drugs because he was so sad. He also was incredibly racist and thought Nazi jokes were okay. And I'm so mad at myself for not realizing that it wasn't okay back then. He ends up cheating on me with his ex, and then he tossed me out the door. He doesn't talk to me anymore and says we shouldn't talk anymore because we aren't together. But here's where it gets bad. And note that this happened over 5 years ago and I have a spotty memory of this time. New accounts pop up in the server that we met on. It was a server of mutual friends, and those accounts start saying horrible things about me, saying Mary is a fat whale, Mary is a N-word, and more things of that sort. The accounts have names like Jerry Touches Kids or Big Fat Whale and etc. I had gotten in trouble with the server owners because it was my fault that people were saying these things, like I had told them to spam things about me or something. The accounts also started messaging me to kill myself, to die, how I'm a whale, a whore, and more. I just ended up blocking every account and I move on with my life. Great, it was over with, right? Or so I thought it was. Fast forward a year to late summer of 2019, and everything starts up again. The messages, him telling people lies and rumors, and also direct threats. I was sent unsolicited porn, death threats, slurs, and that I should kill myself because no one cares about me. And at that time, I had undiagnosed depression and anxiety, and I almost did kill myself. I went to therapy and I tried to get over it. In 2020, right when the quarantine happened, I got a boyfriend. I was super happy and I came back out of my shell. He and I would play games on Discord together, and I joined more servers. But around 2 months later, I got another message. Someone had messaged me named Lily, I believe. It was a normal profile, and we were in a server together, so I really thought nothing of it. She had then messaged me how I was, and I had never talked to her before, so I was kind of confused. She said we had a long conversation about mental health the day before, so she wanted to make sure that I was alright. I asked who she was and what she was talking about, and she said something like, "Oh, you told me about this. You said you take medicine for schizophrenia and must have missed a dose. Are you off your meds?" I was extremely confused and scared because I had never talked to this person and I certainly didn't have schizophrenia. After about 10 minutes of this charade, I realized that it was Dennis. I blocked the account and I didn't accept new friend request. The next day, I got hundreds of messages with the same contents that I previously mentioned, the threats, porn, etc., and I was so terrified that I asked my boyfriend for help. He told me to make a new account and not friend any other mutual friends so he couldn't find me. I did what he suggested, which caused an affiliated Twitch account that I had spent years building. I changed all my accounts, deleted most, and I made new ones. The messages found me again. I have no idea how. These new accounts weren't tied to me. I got fed up and I had asked a mutual friend that I thought that I could trust some personal information about Dennis to go to the police and get a possible restraining order or something. And I didn't totally know how the police handled these issues. Months go by and nothing. Well, until the fall of 2021, in which Dennis messages me again, calling me a stupid bitch, and how he will always find me, and how I'm so fat and dumb and that no one loves me. And I isolated myself and deleted more accounts. I never was able to go to the police because I had no information, like his full name or address. It's been 2 years, and every day I worry if he lives near me, if he knows where I live or where I go to school. I recently found out that he had a website and made YouTube videos. He has made YouTube videos referencing me. His copyright claim is something like Mary the Fat Whale Inc. I can't find it anymore, so I put the closest to what I remembered. It was hell, and I'm still worried every single day that he will find me. I believe he has a Reddit account and could find this. And I hope that we don't meet again, Dennis. I wish you the worst. Short backstory. This happened almost a year ago. I'm a 19-year-old female, and I lived in a small town in Australia. I always take my 13-year-old Jack Russell mix for a short 20-minute walk down the road at about 7 to 7:30 p.m. On this night, I had to take him at about 8 to 8:30 p.m. as I had to work late. The sun was just setting to the point where I can see, but not too well. That could have just been my poor eyesight, but it was enough to manage without needing a flashlight. Although I did have one on me, I just didn't want to use it. We had just made our loop around a small community garden, and as I was leaving the gate, I looked to my right, and I saw a person in all black heading towards me. I was also wearing all black, so we both looked pretty suspicious. But out of panic, I crossed the road and I headed left. They did the same not 1 second later. I'm a naturally fast walker, but I made myself go faster. All I had to do was cross the road one more time and then turn right, go down a few houses, and then I'm home. So I'm walking faster, but not enough to where it was obvious. I crossed the road and I turned right, and this person didn't cross the road, but he turned right and stayed on the other side of the road. We were about parallel on the street, and I knew that if they crossed the road, I could run, and I wasn't too far from home. When I got into my yard, the person stopped across the road, and at this point, I realized that the door was locked and I didn't have a key. The person stayed across the road as I rang the bell. I was pounding on the door, and my older brother answered, and the person had just made it into our yard. My brother told this person to F off, and he walked back the way we came. My brother asked who it was, and I explained everything to him. From this day, I take my dog for a walk before work, early in the morning, rather than after work at night. I do enjoy sunset walks, but for my safety, I stop them, even after a year. In June of this year, I moved out of my parents' apartment as I finally got a steady job and longed for some sort of freedom. I looked for apartments that were affordable in my city, and I found one that's a 2 or 3 minute walk from my parents' apartment. To me, it was perfect. I'd get to live alone, and my parents would still be nearby, so I could visit them whenever I wanted or pop in to have breakfast with them. The apartment itself is great. It's not really much to look at, but for a single male, it's more than enough. My apartment has a long corridor connecting each room together from the sides, with my front door being at the start of the corridor. My bedroom is the second room on the left, but since the walls are pretty thin, you can literally hear people in the apartment complex walking, talking, and etc. from my bedroom, and for any room for that matter. Last week, I came home from the pub after meeting up with a few friends. It wasn't really late, around 10:15 or 10:30-ish, and I had the day off, so I took a shower and I hopped into the bed to watch Netflix. It was probably around midnight when I heard a faint knocking coming from the front door. I stopped the show that I was watching and listened for a minute or so, and just thought that it was my mind playing tricks on me. I continued watching Netflix when once again, I heard a 2-motion knock on my door. I sat up from bed, went to the door, and looked through the peephole. And sure enough, it was pitch black, so I once again shrugged it off and went back to my room. But before I could even sit down properly, I heard a slightly louder knock. At this point, I thought it was my friends playing a prank on me, so I called my friend and asked if he was knocking on my door and if he thought that it was amusing. He paused for a second and said, "Dude, I'm at home. I have to be up at 7:30. And I believed him, and I hung up the phone. I was talking pretty loudly, so whoever was knocking probably heard me, and as soon as I hung up, I heard another knock. At this point, I was pretty pissed off, so I walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and I saw nothing. I then unlocked the door, took a peek, and closed the door and locked it. Me, being angry and a bit intoxicated, I decided to wait and catch whoever was knocking. So I spent a solid 10 minutes silently looking through the peephole before being a bit startled as someone put their hand over the peephole and knocked again. I immediately started unlocking the door and I ran out to the apartment hall, and I heard someone booking it down the steps. And I heard him lean against the wall as his jacket shrugged the wall. So I ran a few steps down before realizing that whoever this is was waiting behind the corner to get the jump on me. I hurried back inside and I then called the cops, and they were there within a few minutes and then scanned the building and the street, but couldn't find anyone. They told me that it could just be some kids pulling a prank and to never run after someone. They kept a patrol car around the entire night, and the knocking stopped. It could have been some kids being dumb, but the part that gave me the creeps was the fact that whoever it was that ran down the stairs and stopped behind the corner, he didn't keep running. If it were some pranksters, I find it more likely that they would have just booked it outside. As I said, it's been a week and the knocking stopped. It kept me on edge for a few days because I just expected to be jumped by someone while walking into my apartment. But so far, nothing has come of it. I've let it go at the moment, and I just hope that it won't happen again. It was in 2018, back when I lived in the suburbs of Paris. I've been playing Pokemon Go since its release, and I used to go out at night to play, always with my best friend on a voice call. It was a night like any other, following my usual route. It was around 2 a.m. and I had already covered a good 2 kilometers, and I found myself about 1 kilometer away from home. I was standing near a Pokestop, catching what I could while talking to my friend, just like every night. It was a residential street with a few streetlights, but it was quite dark as there was a field just behind it. After about 5 minutes, I noticed a man in his 30s on the opposite sidewalk. He was just a few meters away from me, and he was holding head shears in his hand, and there were a pile of branches at his feet. I thought the man was just trimming the branches of his tree. However, when I described the scene to my friend, he said, "You should leave right away. No one does gardening in the middle of the night." But despite my friend's warning, I was so focused on Pokemon Go that I wanted to capture all the Pokemon before leaving. So I stayed, but while keeping an eye on the man's actions. As I looked at the man, I realized that he wasn't cutting any branches. He was only staring at me. He would occasionally move and hide behind a parked van nearby while spying on me through the windows. However, he knew very well that I could see him, and I began to feel scared. Despite my friends pleading for me to leave, I still hadn't caught all the Pokemon, so I hesitated to go. The man continued his strange behavior, crossing over to my side of the street and hiding behind some bushes while staring at me. Then, he went back to his pile of branches and stared at me again. Finally, I had enough. I decided to leave. I walked normally towards my home, trying not to show any fear. I had a straight path back home, and my friend on the call asked me to check behind me in case the man was following me. And indeed, he was, still holding the head shears about 10 meters behind me. I then made a left turn instead of going straight, even though it made my way longer. I wanted to be sure that he was following me and that it wasn't just a coincidence. And yes, he continued to follow me. I picked up my pace, taking snaps just in case something happened. And when I reached the end of the street, I was out of breath, but I was safe. There was no one behind me, and I entered my home feeling relieved. Suddenly, a white car pulled up right in front, stopped, and the driver's window rolled down. It was the man with the pruning shears. Now, he knew where I lived. I rushed inside. I locked everything. I grabbed a kitchen knife and I waited until someone woke up so that I could go to bed. There were no further incidents, and nobody believed me, so we checked the surveillance cameras at home, and unfortunately, I was right. When I was 18 and newly graduated, I ran into some issues with my attempts to enroll in college. I also had a hard time finding a job in my area in the meantime, which led me having to sign on at the job center. They determined that I was too shy to succeed in interviews and then placed me in a group that was supposed to teach me interview skills in order to fix that. Well, the group ended up ultimately being a complete waste of time. I honestly think that they put me in the wrong group or just needed an extra member and made an excuse to throw me in to make up the numbers. But that's not really relevant to the story. The other group members didn't do much to help with my shyness either, since they were all men who were at least 4 decades older than me, and obviously didn't share any of my interest. Unfortunately, I ended up gaining the attention of one member that I wanted nothing to do with. I don't actually remember the man's name at this point, but I think it was something generic like John, so that's what I'll call him. John immediately got off on the wrong foot with the rest of the group when he interrupted the instructor during their introduction to the course to complain that him being there was useless since he would be retiring in a few years anyways, and that no one wanted to hire someone who had spent over 10 years in prison. When that didn't get him the reaction he wanted, I assume that the rest of the group thought that he was just attention-seeking, and the instructor had heard similar things before from people who weren't happy about being in the course. He waited until he had been given paperwork to complete, and then turned to the man next to him and loudly explained his prison sentence was for beating his ex-wife, but that she was a lying bitch and he never put a hand on her. She didn't even have any bruises on her at the trial or any evidence of bruises or other injuries before that either, because she was a woman. But because she was a woman, the judge automatically believed her and then sent him to jail. This immediately set me on edge. I'm not an expert when it comes to the law, but I do watch true criminal channels on YouTube, and I have never heard of a sentence of over 10 years for a single beating that supposedly never even happened, that didn't leave any visible injuries. Either John was lying and had severely beaten his wife to the point of putting her in the hospital, or he had been arrested on other charges and was covering up what he actually went to prison for. I immediately decided that I wanted nothing to do with him regardless of which one it was, and that I would avoid interacting with him as much as possible, outside of the polite hellos and passing him things if he asked. Like I said before, I didn't really interact much without the other members of the group at all because of their ages. I attended the first half of the meeting in the morning, and I spent the dinner break in the library while the men all snuck off to the pub and then went home immediately after the second half was over. No one has ever asked me how I spent my breaks, and since the pub and the library were in the opposite directions from each other and couldn't be seen from the front of the building the group met in, because of the way the streets were arranged, there should have been no way for any of them to know where I had been, which made what happened next even more worrying. About halfway through the course, there was a day where I had bumped into a friend on my dinner break, and I decided to put off visiting the library until the course was over for the day, just to catch up with them instead. When I did get around to it, I spent at least quarter of an hour there before heading to the desk to check out my books, and I ended up being drawn into a conversation by the librarian who had noticed that I was checking out books related to a franchise that he also enjoyed, and that was getting a new movie the next year. There were only a handful of other people in the library, so I didn't see anything wrong with talking to a friendly man around my age who shared my interest after 8 hours of boredom and paperwork. We had been talking for another quarter of an hour when he suddenly glanced over my shoulder, kinda looking confused and concerned, and was just opening his mouth to say something when someone grabbed me by my shoulders. My friends and family know that I hate having my shoulders touched without warning and would never have done that to me. So I immediately knew that whoever was touching me was a stranger, and I knocked their hands away while turning around and backing up into the librarian's desk. It was John. He was standing directly behind me with a huge smile on his face, and as soon as I turned around, he made a joke about knowing he would find me there and how I practically lived there before chattering at me as if we were close friends. I was just completely confused. It was obvious that he hadn't just coincidentally bumped into me from the way he was talking, but John had been kept behind while the group was heading out because he had filled out his paperwork incorrectly, and as I mentioned before, you can't see the library from the building, so he shouldn't have had any way of seeing where I had gone. It had also been half an hour since I left the building, so if he had left not long after me and just seen me go in while we were walking in the same direction, he would have come inside by then. The only way it made sense for him to know to look for me there and joke that I practically live there would be if he had somehow learned that I was going to the library during dinner breaks, known that I hadn't that day, and guessed that I would go after the meeting instead. What made that even stranger than it already was is the fact that John had never shown any interest in me during the group sessions and mostly ignored me the way I ignored him unless we were forced to interact for whatever reason. So, why was he now following me into other buildings to start conversations out of nowhere and acting like we were close? While John was still talking, the librarian leaned in to ask if I knew the man because he had obviously seen my negative reaction to being touched by John, and when I briefly explained the situation to him, he asked John politely to please leave me alone or leave the building. John refused and tried to tell the man that we were friends, completely ignoring the fact that I had just said that we weren't and how ridiculous it would be to claim an 18-year-old girl and a 50-something or 60-something-year-old man were friends in the first place. When the librarian asked again and outright told him that harassing other customers wasn't acceptable and he would be removed from the building if he refused to leave me alone, John smiled and agreed to leave in a tone that you use when you're humoring a child before walking out and very obviously stationing himself right outside the doors, waiting for me to leave too. The librarian was clearly concerned by this and asked for the full story of what was going on, and I told him, including my suspicions that John had been following me around without my knowledge to know that I would be there in the first place. He suggested that I should stay in the library until his break so he could walk me to my bus stop to make sure that John left me alone, but it would be several hours, and if I had waited, I wouldn't have gotten home in time to change and head to another meeting that I had later that evening. So, he asked me to at least come in the next time I was there to let him know that I was safe, and reluctantly watched me leave. John immediately stepped into my personal space when I got outside, jokingly asking what the librarian's problem was, and still acting like we were friends. I tried to walk around him without answering him and head to the bus station to go home, but he grabbed me by my arm and reminded me that there was a closer stop for our bus. When I told him that we aren't getting the same bus because I had never seen him on the same one as me, he corrected me and said that we both needed the number blank bus and told me where he lived, which was in fact on the same bus route as me. Although I was still tempted to walk away and go to the station instead, and possibly sneakily get on a different bus and just walk the rest of the walk home, it was very clear that he was going to follow me if I did, because he still had a hold of my arm, refusing to let go when I tried to pull away. There were several dark alleys on the way that I had no intention of going anywhere near while in his company. When I agreed to go to the closer bus stop, he let go of me and started walking at my side, chattering like we were good friends again. John kept walking when we reached the stop, which was odd, but I was hoping that my lack of response to anything he said had made him give up and decide to leave me alone, or that he had mixed up the bus stop with one further along and I could run while his back was turned. Well, no luck, but as soon as he realized that I wasn't following him anymore, John came back, frowning as if he was confused and asking me, "I thought we were going for coffee together." Shocked, I told him bluntly no. He kept pushing, trying to convince me that I had agreed to go with him, and when that didn't work, he switched tactics and claimed that I had mentioned while leaving the classroom that I wanted some coffee, so he thought that we could go together. That was an obvious lie too, since I don't drink coffee and I told him so. John's only answer was to say that I didn't have to get coffee and kept pushing me to go to a cafe with him. I firmly told him no, and apparently he took that as me not wanting to drink in public because he attempted to invite me to his flat. If that wasn't weird enough, he started telling me that if there was a naked girl on the couch when we get there, I'm not to worry because that's just his 18-year-old daughter. Because an 18-year-old daughter is definitely going to lounge around naked on her father's furniture in front of him, right? Other people at the stop were staring at us, and I took the opportunity to point out that I was also 18 and firmly tell John that I don't want to go to his flat with him and to leave me alone. He completely ignored the last part and tried to claim that I was lying about my age and that I was at least 29, when most people at that time still mistook me for being in my early teens at first glance. The bus arrived at that moment, and I got on as quickly as possible, thinking that I would be safe there and the driver would throw him off if need be. Well, no. When I sat in an aisle seat to stop John from sitting next to me, he physically shoved me across the seat, pitting me in against the window to the point that I could barely move, and pressing his knees up against the seat in front of him to make sure that I had no room to get past him unless he allowed it. The only way for me to get out would have involved me straddling his lap since the seats in front of us were occupied. I loudly told him to move and to leave me alone, but he ignored me, and then he continued trying to convince me to come to his flat. And although a few people gave me uncomfortable looks, when I tried to make eye contact with some of the men in the hopes that they would help me, they would look away as if they hadn't noticed or suddenly become very interested in their phones. I spent the ride huddled against the window, trying to touch him as little as possible, and was ignored again when I shouted at him to stop touching me because he kept putting his hand on my thigh and as high up as he could get without directly groping me. No one did anything about it, but he stopped touching me after that. He had apparently also given up on convincing me to go to his flat that day, but when we were coming up to the apartment block, he pointed it out to me. Physically turning my face when I refused to look, told me his apartment number, and tried to give me a kiss goodbye on the cheek. And when I dodged, before getting off the bus and knocking on the opposite window to try and get my attention so he could wave at me. When the bus set off again, several people started loudly talking about how disgusting he was and that men like him should be reported, while refusing to look in my direction where I was sat shaking and seething in my seat. And other than an awkward, so are you alright? From the driver, just as I was about to step off the bus, no one bothered to check on me. As soon as I got home, I sent an email to the instructor telling her that I wanted to switch groups and never see that man again, explaining what he had done to me. She read it, but ignored it for an entire week until I sent a follow-up threatening to get the police involved if they forced me to interact with this man again. And their solution was to tell me that I could leave the course early instead, essentially kicking me out as if I was the problem. I bumped into the man not long afterwards, and he tried to ask me why I hadn't been attending the group anymore, admitting that he had asked the instructor and they refused to tell him. But I managed to get away and lose him in the crowd. I've seen him a few times in passing in the years since, but fortunately, he has never noticed me or approached me again. And I hope that it stays that way. So recently, I had a few encounters with a delivery guy. The first thing he asked me was, "Are you," my full name, "from my previous address?" "You moved, huh?" While smiling creepily, I thought he was just a delivery guy that was trying to do small talk, so I just brushed him off. I am living alone, so I thought I was just being overthinking by getting creeped out. Then I realized after I thought about it that he was my neighbor in my previous address. He striked up a conversation with me, saying that he knows one of my friends. I don't really like talking to strangers, so I didn't talk with him long, but it stayed with me because I felt uncomfortable with him, like I felt that he was dangerous. After that, I was going out and I saw him again delivering to my neighbor, and I ignored him trying to walk by. He saw me and then recognized me even after I was wearing a mask, and he asked me the same question again. After that, since I don't go out much, I don't see him as often. There was this one time that he was standing in front of my neighbor's house, but I just walked by. Then, I saw him in my Facebook friend request, and I just ignored him again, but I was obviously creeped out, so I told my friend that he said he knew. At first, my friend said that she doesn't know anyone with that name, but his last name made her recognize him as a son of a family friend. They never really talked. His family didn't know he was working as a delivery guy, and he was laid off because he became obsessed with his boss, which was older than his mom. I also lost my keys, so I asked my landlord for replacement. I didn't think much of it until I got home to my door open. Obviously, I was cautious, but there was no one at my apartment, so I sighed in relief thinking maybe I left it open. I work nights, so sometimes my mind is all over the place. But now that I am thinking about it, I overlooked a lot of things, and I am thinking of installing a CCTV in front of my apartment. I am still scared though because he knows my address. Update. My friend told me to report him to the police, but I'm too scared because they might just let him go and he'll take revenge on me. She also told me that he might be doing drugs as sold by his family since he is acting suspicious. The most that I can do right now is just to change my locks and install a CCTV in front. Please wish me luck, guys. Another update. Thank you. I am overwhelmed by you guys worrying about me. So far, I haven't encountered him anymore, though I don't really go out much, and I also set my delivery name to my boyfriend's. Maybe because his family knew and talked to him, I haven't caught anything strange around my house too. I think I am in a safe zone now, and I am going to move to a different city a few months after this, probably with my dog. About 3 years ago, when I was 18, I worked as a waiter in a restaurant in the mall. I am very introverted, but it never affected my relationship with my customers. But speaking to people that I wasn't serving gave me major butterflies. I had just finished my shift at around 5 p.m. and I was walking out when I noticed a woman who looked in pain, holding her stomach and was looking at me. I had to walk past her to get to the exit, and I was trying to avoid her because I was not looking for conversation, and I hated when people ask for money. I know, it's very selfish, but I work really hard for the little money that the customers tip me that day. I maneuvered my way around the people, but she called out to me. I acted like I didn't hear her, and I moved faster. But eventually, she ran to me and grabbed my arm crying. "Please, Please, brother, I got children and I got cancer of the tummy. And she lifted up her dirty shirt and showed me a large surgery wound across her stomach. I told her that I didn't have anything, but she continued to badger me. Eventually, I just ran to the stairs and I went upstairs and I saw her chasing, but I was way more faster. She slowed down at the second case to catch her breath, and I turned in to get off at the third floor where she could not see me. I then took the elevator next to the stairs back to the first floor so I could get to the exit. Eventually, I got to the bus stop and I was on my way home. When I got off at my stop, I went to the corner shop to get a bread. But at the end of the road, I saw the woman from the mall and her boyfriend. They must have definitely seen me, even though I made an effort to take a longer way home so they wouldn't have seen me. At around 7 o'clock, I get a knock at my gate. I live in a house that has 2 slide gates in front of the main entrance. I looked out of the window, and to my horror, I saw the woman and her boyfriend. I stayed quiet and I hoped that they would just go away, but they stayed outside of my house for 2 hours until my parents arrived. They begged my parents for money or food to feed their kids, and my father found it weird that they were there at 9 p.m., so he told them that we didn't have any and to get away from the house before they called the police. And surprisingly, they left without any hassle. I told my parents that these people were begging me for my money at the mall and that they followed me home and stayed outside the house for 2 hours. Luckily, we never saw them again after that day. To start, I'd like to say that at the time of this, I was only 14 at that time, so I was in my last year of middle school when this all happened. That's when I found a note in my locker. It fell out as soon as I opened the door and floated to the ground. Given how crumpled it looked, it was as though it was hastily shoved between the crack of my locker door. Picking it up, I realized that it was a card. Opening it, I was greeted with a picture of myself in a shape of a heart. I immediately blushed as I saw this. My friends, huddling close to see what it was, all gawked and then started teasing me for having a secret admirer. I have never dated before, so I wasn't sure how to feel about all of this. But I wasn't exactly against it at that time. Wait! One of my friends said, trying to calm down the group. There's something written on the back. What does it say? Another asked. Turning the card around, there was a handwritten note on the back. To the lovely Miss Singh. I began reading out loud. I have fawned over your beauty from afar since you first came to this school. I am entranced by your looks and your kind heart, and I shall wait for the day when I can confess my love to you. Until then, I shall continue to gaze lovingly from afar. From your soulmate. The girls around me began to giggle. Soulmate, huh? My best friend laughed. Well, he certainly has a way with words. I wonder who it is. Another girl asked. I doubt any boys that go here could write like that. Maybe it's a girl? She said between chuckles. After more teasing from my friends, we eventually went to class. It was boring as ever. Mr. Gordvik tried his best, but history is not a class that could ever excite me. After a few classes, it was finally lunch. So me and the girls decided to talk about the note again, and more importantly, how to figure out who my secret admirer was. Well, I think that it's Miles, Beth guessed. The track dude in Mr. G's class? I asked. Yeah, he was totally checking you out in history class. Another friend agreed. Then he got totally chewed out by Mr. Gordvik. I've never seen him scold anyone that badly. I let out a sigh and asked, any other candidates? And while Miles was pretty cute, I wasn't into the super fit workout kind of guy. After a while of speculating, my friends convinced me to talk to Miles, just to get his name off the list of candidates. We chatted for a bit, but it seemed very clear that Miles wasn't my secret admirer. And while my friends thought that he might just be playing coy, the next day I found another letter in my locker, this time much less romantic. In the letter, my so-called admirer called me a whore and a sadist for playing with his feelings. Red flags about this guy were being raised at an alarming rate. He was acting like I cheated on him, even though I have no idea who he is. At this point, I wanted as little to do with whoever this was, but given how just talking to someone set him off, I wanted to get to the bottom of this before things got worse. Thinking on my feet, since this guy clearly went by my locker a lot, I taped a note to my locker door at the end of the school calling him out, asking for a meetup behind the bleachers after school. Of course, I wasn't dumb enough to meet someone that weird all alone, or at all to be honest. And while I said to meet me there, I secretly hid with a couple of my friends not too far away, simply waiting to see who turned up. And to both my surprise as well as my disgust, the person who showed up was my history teacher, Mr. Gordvik. While I wanted to believe it was a coincidence, the note in his hand certainly looked like the one that I had taped to my locker. Me and my friends all simply hid there for what I think was around half an hour, and Mr. G just stood there, waiting. Eventually, he walked away looking visibly angry as he did. I looked over to my friends and they looked back at me. The feelings of disgust and fear surrounded the group. I wasn't sure what I planned on doing after finding out who it was, but now I was completely lost. I had no idea how to handle things, but luckily, one of my friends told me that I needed to report this to the guidance counselor. I was hesitant because the last thing that I wanted to do was let Mr. Gordvik know that I found out that he was my stalker. But she was right. This couldn't go on left unchecked. The counselor had already left to go home by now, so we decided that I'd do it the first thing tomorrow morning. When the day came, I went to put my things in my locker. When I stopped, there was a terrible smell coming from my locker. I noticed it just as I was about to unlock it. Feeling a pit form in my throat as I slowly opened the locker, I pulled by the door to reveal a picture of me with the words, "Stop messing with me," in bold written in red marker. And below the photo was a disgusting slab of raw meat. It was cut into the shape of a heart, and I hurled, whether it was from the smell, the sight, or the fear of the situation, I don't know. But all I do know is that by the time that I was feeling slightly better, a crowd has already formed around me. My friends were there trying to make me feel better. Then Beth helped me up and took me to the nurse's office. In there, after a few minutes, the guidance counselor came in. She said that my friends told her what happened, but she wanted to hear directly from me to get my perspective on the situation. I broke down crying. I told her everything, the notes, Mr. G waiting behind the bleachers, and then the meat in my locker. The counselor nodded her head, stroking my back as I cried into her shoulder, saying nothing until I was finished, before trying to comfort me and then reassure me that everything will be okay. And to my surprise, she was right. Within the day, Mr. Gordvik was suspended for evaluation, which by the third day, after finding footage of him putting something into my locker was found, on the school security system, which resulted in his house being searched. And while they didn't find much evidence, what they did find was very condemning. A single journal, which contained his day-to-day thoughts, and a few photos from me, which were from my Facebook, printed out and framed, were all that they needed to press charges. His teaching license was revoked, and he was put on a watch list. I never saw Mr. G in person again, only a few times on the news. So, to Mr. Gordvik, my disgusting and sick history teacher, I hope we never meet again. The hum of treadmills and clinking of weights surrounded me as I pushed through my workout at the gym. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until I noticed this guy. He was always in the corner of my eye. He was there every time that I looked up, watching, lingering. At first, I thought he was observing me to get some examples of exercises, or it was really just a coincidence. But as the days passed, I realized that he was a constant presence. A knot tightened in my stomach. His gaze followed me from machine to machine, like a shadow that refused to fade. I began to feel uneasy, and I was checking over my shoulder more often than focusing on my reps. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being hunted in a place where I should feel safe. The guy's eyes bored into me, and his presence became suffocating. I started changing my routine. I was going at odd hours, hoping to escape his watchful eyes. And one day, he approached me with a forced smile on his face, I think. My guard went up, every instinct screaming at me to back away. He started making small talk, really too close for comfort, and I kept my responses short, desperately trying to find an escape route. As the days turned into weeks, the constant stalking took a toll on my nerves, and I really debated reporting it, but fear held me back. What if it makes him angry? What if he retaliated? What if it makes things worse? But then, suddenly it stopped. The guy disappeared from the gym as abruptly as he had appeared. No more lingering glances, no more unsettling presence, and the weight on my shoulders lifted, but my confusion lingered. What changed? Why did he stop? I cautiously resumed my irregular routine, glancing over my shoulder less frequently. The gym returned to a place of focus and determination rather than the fear, but still, the memory of those watchful eyes haunted me. Hi everyone. This situation has been ongoing for many months, and I'm really interested to hear others' perception and any possible advice. I have lived at my apartment complex since 2021. It's a pretty big place with lots of buildings, lots of people, and lots of dogs. I have a dog myself who is unfortunately reactive. I generally just keep to myself when walking her, and I pivot if we see someone walking towards us. Many months ago, I started seeing this guy show up at the same time that I walk my dog. He would be walking to the dog park on the far back entrance. He sees how my dog is and makes no attempt to give us space. In fact, there are times where he even gets closer to us, and this has happened for months. I begin to think that maybe he's just tense, maybe unaware, or something like that, and think that maybe he's just trying to let his dog play early in the morning before work. So I start taking my dog out 30 minutes earlier. But he starts coming out at the same time too, 30 minutes earlier. Again, he does not try to avoid me when I am actively trying to get away from him. He has never said a word to me, and he is constantly showing up right after I leave, no matter what time or however often I deviate from my schedule. The other day, I am out with my mom walking my dog, and we see him across the parking lot walking towards us. He has always expected me to move out of the way, even though I am there first. Plus, my dog is pooping, so I can't really move. He walks like 2 feet to the right of us, so of course, my dog is going ballistic. My mom noticed too and said that's weird. Well, tonight, it happened again. I said screw it. I will move out of his way because I don't want to deal with a headache. So I move off the sidewalk and then walk next to this fence, keeping my dog on a tight leash because she's just freaking out now. As we were almost right next to each other, but several feet apart, I look over and see that he's kind of behind me and still walking towards the park. I get back on the sidewalk and my dog suddenly jumps behind me in a protective stance. I turn around and this man was standing less than 10 feet behind me, facing me and staring and not saying a word. Apologies for the novel. I just really needed to provide background information. So, what are your thoughts? And how should I address this creepy neighbor? I'm a female, and I have had my fair share of creeps. I may share those stories in another post, but for this one, I'm going to share the one that scared me the most. I was 25 at that time, only recently moving out of my parents' home to a small apartment. And now that I'm living on my own, I had to get my own groceries and the sorts. So I stopped by the supermarket in the evening, like after work, looking for things that I would need. As I wandered through the aisles of the store, I was just minding my own business and I picked up a few things. But then I noticed a guy who was watching me out of the corner of my eye. Politely, I just tried to ignore it until he approached me with a confident grin. "Hey, you're pretty cute. Can I get your number?" he asked a bit too eagerly. I politely declined, saying that I wasn't interested. And that's when his smile faded and then replaced by a scowl. An uncomfortable tension hung in the air as I slowly and awkwardly back away to continue my shopping. As I passed through the canned goods, I could feel his eyes on me, the unease growing with each aisle that I navigated. And when I reached the checkout, I hoped that he would give it up and hopefully leave. But instead, he remained, lingering nearby me. He looked angry, yet determined. Feeling very uneasy by this, I quickly paid before grabbing my bags and making a beeline for the exit. As I stepped outside, I just couldn't help but look back, wanting to know if he was following me. And so he was. Panic set in, but I tried to keep my cool, briskly walking toward the crowded street. However, after looking back at him, the guy quickened his pace, now openly upset. I turned a corner, almost running at this point. I was trying to lose him, but his strides were much bigger than mine, and I could visibly see the distance between us shrinking as he followed. Fear gripped me, and I broke into a full sprint, dodging through the bustling crowd, and I glanced behind me. And then I was relieved to see that he was falling behind, getting blocked by the crowds. I didn't stop there though. I continued my mad dash until I reached a well-lit area with more people. The man was now nowhere in sight, and gasping for breath, I hailed a cab to take me home, constantly checking my surroundings. After arriving at my home, Now safe behind my front door, I locked it with a sigh of relief. This encounter left me shaken, reminding me of the danger that could lurk in unexpected places. I spent the evening looking over my shoulder, paranoid that the man may have followed me home somehow. Needless to say, I did not get much sleep that night. I was grateful for my escape, but now I am much more cautious of the shadows that seem to stretch a bit too far. I never go out in the evenings anymore. I had always been a quiet guy, keeping to myself in university and focusing on my studies. But things changed when I was partnered for a project with Lisa. She was a classmate of mine. It started with her asking me really personal questions that had nothing to do with the project, followed by a lot of texts and following me around with the excuse that she wanted to work on the assignment. But even after the assignment was handed in, she didn't stop there. She was constantly messaging me, following me everywhere, and eventually showing up at my actual home, which I never told her the location of. She cornered me, eyes wild, and demanded that I date her. I really tried to reason with her and tell her that I wasn't interested, but it was like talking to a brick wall. The intensity in her gaze made my skin crawl. I barely managed to slip through my door as she tried to grab my arm. Well, things escalated a week later when I woke up one night hearing some kind of commotion downstairs. I live alone, so it's not like I had a roommate or anything that would make noise. So I went down the stairs, and I stopped as I locked eyes with the last person that I wanted to see. A chill ran down my spine as I saw the glint of a knife in her hand. She was calm, but she was demanding as she told me that I had to be with her. Fear gripped me, but I knew that I had to stay calm. I managed to keep my composure, or at least a facade of it. She asked me why I refused to be with her and asked if there was someone else. Thinking fast, I took out my phone and I scrolled through my contacts. Most of the people on there were family, since I talked to my friends mostly on Discord. Calming her down with this, I sneakily hit the emergency call while putting my phone back into my pocket. Hopefully, someone would get the idea and then send help. Luckily enough, they did. A few minutes later, I heard the sirens. Seeing the look of realization in her eyes, I knew that I had to be anywhere else but in the room with her. So I bolted for the bathroom, shutting it behind me and then locking it. To my surprise, however, the only knock on the door came minutes later, and it was the gruff sound of a man, a police officer. They escorted me outside and told me that Lisa had attempted to run when they entered the building. He assured me that I would be safe now, and I believed him. In court, the reality of her obsession unfolded. Evidence of stalking me came to light, and this evidence consisted of photographs of me that I had no idea that existed. There was a journal that was detailing my daily schedule and many other disturbing things. She was charged with breaking and entering, armed with a deadly weapon. And as the judge delivered the verdict, relief washed over me. Lisa was sentenced to 8 months in a state penitentiary, followed by probation and mandatory therapy. I felt the weight lifted off my shoulders, knowing that I'd be safe from her for the time being. I really learned to be more cautious. I installed better security, and I kept a watchful eye on my surroundings. The university that was once a place of learning became a backdrop for a nightmare for me. The legal system did its part, and now I'm doing mine to keep myself safe. Eventually, my fears of Lisa's obsession began to fade, or at least they did. until Lisa was released last week. And while she's supposed to be on probation, I'm still afraid that she might come here again and do something drastic. I've never forgotten that event, even though it happened over 10 years ago. I'm a 26-year-old female, and I still get goosebumps, and it's even creepier with my adult eyes. In fact, to be more precise, this event took place over a period of more than 6 months. To put it into context, it all started when I was about 14. At that time, I was attending a private secondary school in the south of France, and I used to go to my grandmother's every evening. I wait there for my mother to get off work and then pick me up. My grandmother, who was retired, would wait for me in her car when I got out of school. But the more time passed, the more I wanted to be independent. So I asked her if I could take the bus home, and she agreed. I like to put my headphones on and take advantage of the long journey just to listen to my favorite music and be in my own bubble. The nearest bus stop to her house was about 10 minutes away on foot, because, by bad coincidence, the one opposite the dead end she is living in had been condemned for the lack of use. But that didn't bother me, as I'm more of a stroller by nature. So I started taking the same bus every single day at roughly the same time. Although this could vary, I didn't have classes on Wednesday afternoons, for example. When I was 14, I was really childlike, and when I say childlike, I mean I've always had a childish face. But this time, it really showed. I didn't have a woman's shape, and I always had a cute stuffed animal hanging on my bag. Well, I guess you can imagine that. I first noticed this guy on the bus. It must have been around September to October. He must have been in his 40s, not very tall, and he was also bald. Why did I notice him, you might ask? Well, because he was staring at me. I even had that feeling that he wasn't blinking. He was giving me smiles that didn't inspire confidence, but it was completely instinctive. I'd never been confronted with the reality of the world, and I was still very naive, but I knew something wasn't right. I didn't say anything. I just decided to run away from the situation that didn't make me feel comfortable by looking in another direction, and that was that. But that was just the beginning of something that I would remember forever. This man took the same bus as me every day at the same time, even when my schedule changed. To this day, I still have no idea how he could have got this information. Was he watching me? Did he live around the school? He was always staring at me with those strange smiles, never letting up, but never talking to me. I would get off the bus at my stop, and he would stay on, and then the cycle would start all over again the next day. I was so terrified of this situation that I didn't dare tell anyone. I was afraid that they wouldn't believe me, and also that I wouldn't be allowed out of the house afterwards. And then one day, it was around May to June at the end of the school year. I have had enough. I got off at a stop halfway through the journey, and I hid, naively, behind a tree to try and lose him. I'd had enough of these persistent stares. Except that guy also got off, and he started looking for me. There was nobody around, and that's when I realized that I wasn't safe. The guy was calling me. He said, "Where are you, sweetheart? Come on, let's have a chat." I was, so to speak, sweating and unable to move from my tree. Of course, he eventually found me. He said, "You're really pretty, you know that? I'd love to have a chat, get to know you. Frankly, I didn't want to get to know him at all. He terrified me, and I wanted to go home. I tried to make him understand that he was freaking me out, and I wanted him to leave me alone. I asked him what he wanted, and he kept saying the same thing over and over again. I just want us to get to know each other. The next bus arrived, and I took the opportunity to run to it, except that he did too. He sat down, stopped talking, and stared at me smiling. I was in an internal panic. My thoughts were going in all directions, and I didn't know what to do. I made the worst decision of all, getting off at my usual stop and going back to my grandma's anyway, thinking that he would just do as usual and then stay on the bus. Except that this time, he got off at the same time as me. The stop was in a very lightly trafficked area. I told myself that he was going to kidnap me and that he was going to take me down a small path and that I would never be able to go home again. But I didn't want him to notice my fear, as it seemed to fuel him in a kind of domineering pleasure. So he started asking me to get to know each other again while following me. I picked up the pace, but he kept lining up with me, and he wouldn't let go. Eventually, I reached my grandmother's dead end and finally saw the light at the end of the tunnel. I ran up to her house, and she was standing in the doorway reading a book. She saw me coming, red face still shaking with a panic, with a bald guy staring at us from behind the gate. She saw my face, and I didn't need to talk to her. She yelled that she was going to call the cops if he didn't get out of there fast. So he turned around and left the dead end. After that, my grandmother refused to let me back on the bus. Until my senior year, she picked me up in front of the school gate every single day. And I never saw that man again. When I think that this guy, this adult, followed a 14-year-old girl home, that he became fixated on me, and that this happened every single day, who knows how far it could have gone? Maybe that's the most worrying thing about all of this. So to this man, let's not meet again, and I hope that he never meets a young girl again as well. Today, I no longer take public transport unless I'm accompanied, because it terrifies me. I'm a 20-year-old female, and when I was younger, maybe around 13 or 14, I was walking to town with my mother. I live in a small town in England. It was really a quick walk, like maybe 15 minutes. But about 5 minutes after leaving my house, I had one of the most unsettling encounters ever. While walking, there was a man approaching us. Nothing was weird at this point. I thought that he would walk past us like everyone else. However, this random man leaned in towards me as he was walking past, and then he whispered something to me. I remember it being creepy and along the lines of him knowing where I lived. It was subtle and happened quickly. I was shocked, especially since my mother was right next to me. A really bold move from a creepy guy. I recall the man being possibly in his late 20s, kind of scruffy looking, a little chubby, with longish brown hair and a beard. But I knew that I've never seen him before this point. I waited a few seconds for us to distance ourselves, and then I turned to my mom, completely freaked out, and I quietly asked her if she heard what the guy had said. She said she didn't, and I thought that maybe I misinterpreted the situation, or maybe I just misheard him then. We kind of brushed it off and just continued with our day. I felt uneasy, but tried not to think about it, and the rest of the day was fairly normal. Until the morning after, when my dad was talking to our neighbor. My neighbor told my dad that during the early hours of the morning, there was this man that was lurking right outside our houses for some time. He was hovering over my dad's and my neighbor's cars. Now, this is really weird because we live in a kind of closed-off area, and the only people we see outside of our homes are neighbors. But even they wouldn't come right up to our doors, especially not at like 2 to 3 a.m. Even delivery drivers can't find our house most of the time because we're very hidden away. This has never happened before, and never again after this. Well, at least to our knowledge. Of course, you can imagine how absolutely terrified I was to hear this. I explained to my dad what had happened the day before, and I reminded my mom, kind of a I told you so moment. I felt scared to be in my own home, and I remember calling my friend and talking about the situation. We researched about what we could do, but there wasn't really any action we could take. Just had to be observant and cautious, I guess. I can't remember much about what happened after that, but I never saw that man again. The whole situation creeps me out, and it doesn't make sense to me. The man outside my house wasn't confirmed to be the same man that walked past me earlier, as it was too dark to make out any discernible features. But it sure is an amazing coincidence if so. I never knew where to talk about this experience, but I figure that it belongs here, and I would love to hear your opinions and theories. Hi, my name is Emily, and I'm 25 years old. I want to share something that I have experienced that really messed up my confidence and also my trust. My confidence in people and in the safety of my own home. It has all been shattered. I've only just started putting my life back together, and finally, I feel comfortable enough to share this. This story happened 4 years ago, and I just finished the shift in a diner that I worked in. And just as we were about to close, a bunch of teenagers came in 5 minutes before we were off, and then they ordered a ton of things. And as a side note, from someone who works in places like these, do us a favor and please, don't come in the store when we're almost closed. We would really appreciate that. Anyway, going back to the story. The street lights flickered as I walked home, and the only thing that I could hear was the clicking of my heels against the pavement. My house was a walking distance from the diner, and the buses had stopped running at this hour. So even though I was a bit creeped out of how late it was, I really didn't have a choice but to walk. But as I walked, I heard it. Another set of footsteps behind me. And not really wanting to give in to my paranoia, I tried my best not to look behind me. But eventually, the urge to see what was there got the better of me. And as I did, I saw one of the teens from the diner. He was walking behind me. Did he leave his friends? He seemed to be staring at me, as our eyes met for a moment when I looked back at him. Feeling awkward and a little bit uneasy, I turned around and I picked up the pace, glancing nervously behind me occasionally. And as I turned onto my street, I could still hear his footsteps a few yards behind me. Also, they seemed to be a bit faster than before. Was he following me? My heart raced, each step echoing in my ears. But finally, I reached my apartment, and my fingers were trembling as I unlocked the door. Inside, the dim light from the street barely comforted me. Looking out of the windows, I noticed the young man sitting on my porch. He noticed me peeking through the curtains, and then he got up slowly and knocked on my door. My eyes widened with fear as the man continued to knock, and his knocks were getting louder and more aggressive each time his knuckles hit the door. Freaking out, I grabbed my phone and I called the cops, and I was explaining to them my fears in the situation. They promised that someone would be there in a few minutes, but the minutes dragged on for what felt like hours. And at last, just when I felt like the door was going to give way to what at this point him punching the door, I heard the sirens in the distance that signaled their arrival. Relief washed over me as they approached him, and at first, he didn't take notice, but after they got physical, he seemed quiet and compliant to go with them. Finally feeling brave enough to step out of my house, I look at my door and the relief from before was replaced by morbid fear. The door was a bloody mess. Looking from the man, who was now in a squad car, I realized that it was from him punching my door. And in the midst of blood and scratches was a large dent in my door. Why? What drove him to go that far, and what did he want from me? When asked at the police station, he said that I had dropped something on the way back home and he was trying to give it back to me. But given his attempt to break into my house, I highly doubt that, and of course, the police didn't believe him. I got my door replaced with a stronger one, and then I had the windows changed too while I was at it. It really wasn't cheap, but I simply couldn't sleep otherwise, knowing that if he had gone at the windows like that, he would have easily been able to get in. And I don't want to think about what would happen if he ever did. So I moved to a new place. I'm Indian, and I frequently go to Indian grocery stores. I have been to this store a couple of times since I moved, and one day, I did something silly during checkout. Please note that I'm short, and I was helplessly trying to reach for the divider to separate the groceries in the checkout line. I looked around, and I was hoping that nobody noticed, but this cashier guy is smiling at the whole situation. I smiled back, and I just try to get done with the checkout ASAP. But from that day onwards, I find this guy trying to grab my attention, and he looks at least a decade older than me, quite tall really. And I find him staring at me quite a lot while I'm walking through the aisles where I'm shopping, just taking glances. This happened twice or thrice, and then he starts walking up to me casually and asking questions like, "Oh, how are you?" He doesn't seem to come to me when I'm with my friend, but when I'm alone, I find him lingering around. One day, he just gave me a free snack, and I said no, but he handed it over to me and then left. The next day he asked if I have a job and if I'm married, and he kind of gets excited when I tell him that I'm a developer and I'm single. He doesn't speak English, and he proceeds to say something in Hindi, which I'm not really good at, so I try asking him what he said, and he says something but I don't understand. Also, there have been instances where he would step out of the store and watch me while I'm sitting in the car until I leave. He just smirks and keeps looking at me. I'm a shy introvert, and I'm really bad at avoiding conversations. I always talk nice regardless of who it is. But what should I do now? Does this mean he's interested in me? How do I politely handle this? He kinda knows who I usually shop with, and I don't want to make it an awkward situation for my friends. Am I just overreacting? To clarify, I'm not interested in this person, and I always smile and talk, but maybe that's sending him the wrong signals. This is giving me a not so good feeling. I could stop going to that store But that doesn't seem right. The fact that I have to avoid a public space because of a man makes me feel pathetic, but I understand in terms of safety. Maybe I can always go with someone there if I have to. Not sure if that's the right thing. Like, it's the only Indian grocery store around, and this situation is an inconvenience at this point. I hope anyone that has been through something like this is or are in a better situation with peace. It definitely makes it awkward to get unwanted attention from random people. Update. I'm never going back to that store. I had to go today to get a few things for my friend. She had surgery and she didn't want to come along. She's fine to go out, but I dragged her with me. She hadn't noticed that man all these months. I've been going to the store alone for the past couple of weeks. So, he was just openly flirty today. He used to avoid approaching me if I'm with someone, but that wasn't the case today. He was outside the store when we had reached there, and he smiled at us and went inside. Then he stood at the entrance to get a close-up, and then he leaned towards me and then said hi. Obviously, a lot of people noticed, including my friend, that he kept smiling and looking at me all the time. The store manager was there, and he didn't seem to bother. After we reached back home, I told my friend that I'm never going back there. I asked her if I was just overreacting, and she said no. Today was subtle because I was with her. He didn't talk much, otherwise, he would be standing in front of me asking personal questions. My friend said that she won't take me there for the longest and decided to only go there if we were a group of 3 or more with guys from our circle of friends. This all started about a month ago, starting innocently enough that I just didn't really care too much. I live in a townhouse, and my neighbor who I shared a wall with has had someone recently move in with him, a man who I assume is his brother. The first instance was me laying in bed reading, and I can hear some slight breathing or a general sense that I am being listened to. This escalated through the next few weeks, with this man masturbating nearly every night when my window was open. I would look outside quickly to see who it was, and I could never get a glimpse of this person, and I was so confused on how they could scale the 6-foot fence back in my yard that quickly. From that, it escalated to him masturbating at all hours of the day on random days. On the days he did it, he would be all day by my bedroom window, my living room window, and kitchen window downstairs on opposite sides of the house. I thought I was losing it. Like, are there more than one person? How does this person run away so fast? But I was just like, whatever, I'm a man too, so I didn't feel particularly threatened, and I had a bat in each room just in case. But this is when shit went sideways last night. The masturbating was on another level, and I kept hearing breathing in my basement, and it sounded like someone was in the walls. I kept running to the windows and downstairs, looking everywhere. And again, I could never find this person. This whole night, I thought I was losing my shit. I was extra vigilant, listening in silence in my room. And then I heard it. The man was walking on my roof and peering over where my window was in my bedroom. I freaked out and I pushed my attic, and thank God he was not inside the attic, but opening it allowed me to hear his footsteps on the outside roof crystal clear. Every time someone would be walking on his side and potentially see him, he would run back to the other side and hide. And I called my brother to come and try and get a picture of him. Well, now I know I'm not crazy, because I can hear him perfectly clear. And on top of that, I can hear him perfectly clear and run back into my neighbor's house when he gets too spooked. Well, this is really the scary part. I have a very small window in the basement in a pretty old house that I had absolutely no idea was even able to be opened. Turns out, it can and was unlocked. This man has been in my basement for God knows how many times. For some reason, I don't feel particularly that scared. I have a feeling that he is disabled or something, and I feel bad for him. He makes weird noises like an autistic person might, and I've seen his hand opening the back door, seeing me, and then running back inside, and it was really dirty. I think he is scared of me because he ran so fast in the house when he saw me in the backyard. So I said out loud to him that if he doesn't stop going on my roof or entering my damn house, that I'm going to tell his brother and the cops potentially. I'm totally assuming this, but I have a feeling that the brother took him in because he had nowhere to go and is disabled in some way. So I'm kind of scared that he is going to kick him out. Now all my windows are locked top and bottom, and it's almost winter, so at least I don't mind to keep windows shut. But yes, there's a very creepy compulsive masturbating on my hand. This happened to me when I was around 11 or so. I'm a female in my early 30s now, and my mother actually explained the situation to me when I got older and understood better. The neighborhood that I grew up in was a fairly nice one. Almost everyone knew each other, especially our family, because my parents had an in-ground pool installed, so we had lots of people over and had pool parties. I loved it because we always had big birthday parties for me and my two older siblings. Our house sat a little higher than others, being that it was on a bit of a hill. We had a chain link fence all around with gates on the sides so that people could just go straight to the backyard. There was a set of stairs that led up to the wooden patio going around the pool, almost leveled with it, with a table and a canopy set on it. It was always fun waking up, going swimming till around noon. Then my mom would bring us lunch, and then we would sit out there and eat. Our neighbor on one side had 2 kids. Their youngest was a year older than me, but we always hung out, and the oldest was the same age as my brother. Directly behind us was just a bunch of dense trees, like a small forest, and on the other side was a single guy. We'll call him Frank. Everyone looked older as a kid, but I think he was maybe in his 30s or 40s, and Frank was always nice to us kids in the neighborhood. He gave the best candy at Halloween. He was way too skinny to be Santa, but he still dressed up like one and handed out little gifts to us too. He came to our pool parties and cookouts just like anyone else. When he would go swimming with us, he and my dad would put us kids on their shoulders and we would try to knock each other off. He would toss us in the water or watch us dive or swim like we were racing. He had a dog too, a collie I believe. She was so pretty, so when I wanted to walk around but couldn't go far, I'd just walk over to see her. He would let her go out back with me or let me play with her in his living room until I was called home. So, all around, Frank was a pretty nice and trusting guy. As I got a little older, as mentioned, around 11, I started having more friends over for sleepovers and parties. When this happened, we would have a full reign of the pool. My sister and her friends may be there, but my brother was not, so we could have our own time. We would be rowdy and loud at times, jumping into the pool, screaming and laughing, but all in all, it was fun. A few times we would see Frank walking out to get his mail and he would stop, He would look over, smiling and wave at us, and then continue on. He would make jokes sometimes about us being loud, but all in fun, but that was about it. There were a few times where he actually tossed some water toys over to us, like a beach ball or dive rings that he bought for us. And I remember him saying one time to me and my friends, "So you girls don't get bored in the water?" I didn't really think anything of it at that time, and neither did my friends. It just gave us reasons to keep swimming. There were a few times when Frank was at our place, and I would get out of the pool to go get something from inside, or if I mentioned that I wanted to go swimming, he would end up leaving shortly after, saying that he had things to do. I remember this because he used to tease me about leaving footprints for my mom to clean up, or racing me to the pool, but then he stopped and instead just went home. It was something that I grew to expect, so when he stopped, it threw me off for a while. One summer, Frank had a private fence installed. It wasn't that unusual to me because a lot of neighboring houses started doing the same, but I remember my dad saying that it was going to stick out at that time because all the other houses had the metal ones, including ours. When my dad talked to him about it, he mentioned making the cost of the house higher with a better fence as well. After he put it up though, we would see him looking over the top of his fence, doing what he normally did, waving and then shouting over at us. One time, he hollered over for me while me and my friends were swimming, and then he motioned me over to the fence. I climbed out of the pool, made my way to the fence, and he asked me what the occasion was. I said that I just had some friends over for the weekend, and I noticed that he seemed to be out of breath, and I asked if he was all right. He said he was, and that he just wanted to give me something. And after a few seconds of him looking down, he handed over these floating horse things that were basically pool noodles, and he said that we could use these things for our water fights when we couldn't be on his shoulders. I remember taking them, pretty excited about it, and I thanked him. He was just smiling as I walked back to get in the pool. He stood there for a few more seconds. I got back into the pool until my friend noticed him and asked if he was just going to watch us the whole time. I looked over at him and thanked him, and then he went inside. I remember some of these so clearly now because it's not until afterwards that you realize everything wrong. This continued for the next year. He'd come over less and less, and when he was already over, hanging out back with my dad or something, and I would mention swimming, he'd end up leaving soon after I got in. Him asking me to go over to the fence became a regular occurrence, and he would either give me something or just delay the conversation, like, "How are you? How was school? Any summer plans? Any friends coming over?" Weird questions like that. And at one point, I asked him why he didn't just stay over and talk and swim. His answers were always the same, saying that he had stuff to do or something came up. But the other running occurrence was that he always seemed out of breath, red in the face and sweating. Sometimes, he had even taken his shirt off, which would normally be fine, except for when he goes home from our house saying he has things to do, but now standing in his yard and talking to me. Another time, when I was swimming with my sister and her friend, they were about 17 or 18 at that time, and he shouted for us, and when my sister started getting up to go, he would yell that he wanted me specifically. As a kid normally does, I got annoyed with this because it was almost every time that I was swimming. Not my sister, not my brother, but me. One of the last few times he did this was when the three of us kids were swimming one evening. The sun was just starting to set and my mom had called us in for dinner. My siblings got out, leaving me with the responsibility of picking up all the toys and games since I wasn't ready to get out yet. And lo and behold, as I'm getting out, Frank is yelling for me. I told him that I had to go, and he said that it would be real quick. So I finished up and I walked over to the fence again, where Frank is breathing fast and sweaty. He smiled at me and asked how I was and said that he had something for me. He hadn't given any gifts in a while, so I lightened up a bit and asked what it was. He looked down again, taking deep breaths, and I asked again if he was okay. He slowly looked up and then handed me a pack of glow-in-the-dark dive rings and sticks. He said they were for swimming at night and asked if I ever did. I said thank you, but I also explained that my parents only let my sister swim at night since she was older, unless they were out there with me. But he said to ask my parents if I can, since I'm plenty mature enough. And then he winked at me. I didn't feel good at this point. Being a kid, I didn't really know the whole trust your gut thing, and I just stood there listening and saying that I would, looking down at the gift. He then thought that it would be alright to say, "Then you could also skinny dip like your sister does, but I won't tell anyone." And he let out a creepy giggle. I just remember saying okay or something and then taking off inside. At this point, I definitely felt like something was wrong and I didn't really quite know what he meant by that. So I ate my dinner quietly with little to anyone bothering me. My mom asked if I was alright and I just said that I wasn't feeling good at that time. When it got closer to bed, I was in my sister's room because she was braiding my hair and she asked me what was wrong too. I asked her about skinny dipping and if she did it. We were pretty close, so I trusted her, and I recall her turning red and explaining to me what it was, and she said she only did it once as a dare and not to tell our parents. But then she asked me why or how I knew, and she was not going to let me leave her room till I told her. And for that I am thankful. I explained everything to her, what Frank had said that night, all his gifts and how weird he was acting at the fence. I was scared because she actually had tears in her eyes, so I thought that I was in trouble. She said it would be okay and that I could leave. She comforted me though, telling me that I wasn't in trouble, and so I left. The last thing that I remember was my parents telling me goodnight, and then a crazy next morning. Turns out that my sister actually went and told my parents everything. Of course, she told on herself, but that was the least of their concerns. The next morning when I woke up, there were police at our house and my mom, dad, and sister were talking to them. My mom noticed that I woke up and then ushered me to the kitchen for breakfast. From there, I had to talk to the cops or these detective-like people, and then I'd tell them the same thing that I told my sister. From there, not much was said to me. I was told that Frank had to leave and we never saw him again. I know now that this was my parents' way of protecting me by not telling me what actually happened, which I was thankful for, so that I could continue having a normal childhood. I was told when I got older, though, that he was definitely arrested. They found plenty of evidence in his house alone, but I was horrified to learn what he was most likely doing behind that fence. It was an awful feeling and an awful memory to think back on. I even went in this creep's house alone. I don't blame my parents though. This guy had lived there when I was a toddler, so it was a shock that this was who he was. We got a privacy fence soon after, and my parents were more careful about who they let around us in our home too.
Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.